Howdy, and welcome to Curious Blend. I'm your host, Keller Davis. I'm the owner of Createscape Coworking here in Austin, Texas since 2014. And this is a podcast where we explore the intersections of business, leadership, creativity, and philosophy. And in each episode, we're going to dive deep with inspiring guests who share their unique perspectives and stories. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome John Baxa. John is a market research expert and an accomplished video game developer known for his award-winning game Vessels. He's the founder of Lucky Sun, an independent video game studio. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, John studied psychology at Kalamazoo College and pursued video game design at the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon. Beyond his professional achievements, John is also my husband. And together, we've navigated a journey of creativity and collaboration. So I couldn't think of a better guest to have on the show than John Baxa. John, welcome to Curious Blend.
Thank you for having me, Keller. I am very excited to be here.
Good. I'm so glad that you're able to make the time for this, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we have today.
Yeah. I wish you didn't have to do this to the living room, but I like it.
This is a professional recording podcast studio. I wish I could get our living room looking like this, but
I know you want more neon in our living room.
Always more neon.
Always more neon.
Tell me about Vessels. What made you and the team think, yeah, this is the idea we want to pursue?
My video game Vessels won an award. It won the IGF Award for Best Student Game back in 2021. IGF Award is sort of like where game developers vote for other game developers. It won Best Student Game. I was just a student at the time. We started on the game basically pitching as part of this career sort of vocational program called Hoft Game Lab here in Austin. I found a Facebook ad, I signed up for it, and basically got thrown into this crazy process where I was along 5 other students, and we all pitched our different games. The idea for Vessels has been in the works for a while, if I was to be honest. I originally had an idea about doing a game about someone trapped inside an airlock about 10 years ago when I was actually at Carnegie Mellon. But the first time I wrote the game, it was not very good. Actively, probably one of the worst things I ever wrote. And everyone I showed it to said, this doesn't sound like you. This is terrible. And I kind of put it on a shelf and didn't look at it. And finally, when I came back to this program, something kind of spoke to me where I was like, what about that idea? And what if I changed it and fix these things and try to make it more like me? I pitched it. All of the faculty and instructors who are trying to task what games they're going to work on, they picked the idea. They changed one thing where they added a time loop aspect to it to increase the replay value. And then we went off to the races and started working on the game. It took about a year and a half. We shipped it. I only submitted it to one contest, which was the GDC Game Developers Conference Independent Games Festival, because I worship at the foot of IGF. Because I'm just a slut for indies. And yeah, and then it got nominated, and then it won, and it went beyond my expectations ever.
And obviously I've played the game and I love this game. I'm not even much of a video game person, but I thought Vessels was so cool, and it's one that you can just sit down and actually finish in just a few hours, which I think is really fun and interesting for me. I mean, when I talk to other people about it, they always ask me what platform is it on, where they can find it, kind of just what's the spiel on that?
So for Vessels, I have a personal vendetta against games that are too long, because now that I'm an adult and I have friends and I have family and pets and a house to take care of and all this shit to do, I unfortunately just don't have as much time to really throw into games as much anymore. And I feel I always see people complaining on Twitter. Well, I mean, they're always complaining, but usually complaining about just the sheer length of games. And I really want to see, can I just create a really cohesive experience, especially for a narrative game where you're trapped in an airlock and your goal is to get out of the airlock. And then once you do, you have to decide what are you going to do with all the people on the ship that were basically imprisoning you in there. So the game only runs about 2 to 3 hours, and we priced it equivalently, because I wanted people to just sort of have all right, play through this experience the story, experience the mechanics of possession and pretending to be other people and figuring out how do I gain control on the ship. Yeah, so that's kind of why I wanted it to be the length that it was. And We put it on Steam because just Steam is sort of the gold standard for any indie that's publishing. Like itch tends to be a bit more for hobbyists and free games, and the Epic Game Store is a great place for free like game of the months.
When you're coming up with new game ideas in general, what is the secret sauce that gets you excited about a project and a story, like, at that particular point in time? Is it just something that resonates with you at the moment, or is it just something, some outside thing that inspires you at that time? Like, what makes the timing right?
I think I need to feel personally motivated towards it, and because it's easy to have ideas, but it's not sometimes easy to like choose them or figure out which one's actually the thing that you should be doing. And because I'm in like an indie space, there's a lot of tensions around money and doing things like what would consumers potentially understand, what would audiences get, but there's also still this freedom of like indie, like, no, do something insane and weird, and guess what, that'll be one of the best selling games that creates a number of different clones. So I feel like I just confuse myself even more because it's like you have two different directions as you go on. So ultimately, the decider for me is always going to be me. And what do I respond to? And what do I feel like needs to exist at this current time? And what is it in like conversation with? I think Vessels is very much in conversation with narrative adventure games. I want it to be, I think it is, but it's very much in conversation with narrative adventure games, especially like walking simulators, which I really enjoy. There's like really great ones like Tacoma, What Remains of Edith Finch. But a lot of those games, as I've like played them, are beautiful, like really engrossing experiences, and can feel a little bit like on rails, like you're kind of exploring a haunted house where all this sort of things have been set up for you, or things like in Tacoma have happened in the past and you're just sort of watching and sort of experiencing what the crew on that space station went through. But with Vessels, I really wanted the player to feel like an active participant in the narrative and wanted them to kind of play with a lot of moral questions of what do I do with this crew? Like, who am I? As you gain more power on the ship, you're basically asked by this entity in your head, which may or may not be you, about whether what you'll do. Basically, it kind of is trying to indoctrinate you, and it's up to you to decide by the end of the game whether you want to fight it or not or go along with it.
Like, when you're making video games in general, like, your games feel incredibly authentic to you and your personality. And like, kind of taking a step back to creative process, like, is it that, like, do you have certain rituals to your creative process, or is it just kind of organized chaos, or how do you get something made? Because I feel like a lot of people can come up with ideas, and actually delivering on ideas and producing something and finishing it is a whole nother thing. And you've done a great job at like finishing through with like these projects that really feel authentic to you. So, I mean, what's your process? What's your creative process?
My process is basically like chaos. I wish it could say it was more structured and like by the book and like I write for an hour each day, every day and do stuff. But the truth is like it ebbs and flows. And there's moments where I kind of get myself tied into knots over what to do next, or I get overwhelmed because there's so much in indie game. Like making a game is so complex because you're basically building a house while you're making the blueprint for it and filling it with furniture. But all right, now I need to change out the living room and put this in here. And like, wait, what do we do with all of the furniture we brought in here? It's just really complex. I think the best way, the most consistent way I think I write and create games is usually connected to getting things done at night. It sounds bad, but like usually the best things I write happen between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. And it's usually when I'm writing like the most like confessional stuff or the most emotional things or just the most compelling things. So that probably time and place has a big impact on it. I think I also speak a lot when I'm writing, especially in games or like designing and like talking things out and hearing how it sounds and almost flipping into characters as I'm doing something to make sure that it feels like whoever I'm writing for, or if it has the weight that I need it to have in order to like really like kind of like hit a beat with like the player that, ooh, something's going on here. So Definitely time and place, and unfortunately talking to myself.
Like, do you think you write the best at nighttime because there's just not as many distractions going on with work and other things?
I think so, but I also think there's just something about like the night. Like I love conversations that you feel like you can only have at 2 a.m. when everything else gets kind of like pulled away and you're talking in this much more intimate, quieter space. Even if there's like, say, like a party going on or you're like at a club and you're out on the stoop, like maybe that's because I'm like that friend. I'm like the friend that's like sitting on the stoop with like the girl who's crying and be like, you know what, he was terrible to you and let's get you home and you should probably throw up. I think that's a big piece of it. It's not necessarily that there are no distractions. I think it's just a more honest time of the day about feelings and emotions.
That's true. I have seen you, like, even just in the middle of some kind of social event or something, like, take out your phone and start just, like, writing lines of dialogue. So I think it's not just the lack of
I'm
distraction. I think it's more than that.
Yeah, that's also the other thing is like I'm also working all the time. Like I'm always thinking about my game on some level. Even
Mhm.
like when I'm talking to people like I have like multiple brains, so I'm still listening and paying attention and everything obviously, but I'm always like thinking about things and I'll have like interesting conversations where it will come back and I'll be like this is actually like material. Like this is like part of the process and figuring out what to say and like what I'm trying to say with a game or a character or a scene. I don't know. I'm just always listening.
I mean, I love the infectiousness of when that creative spark kinda takes over and you really can't stop thinking about it. Because 'cause I've experienced that with business and with, like, my own writing and creative projects, and it's always so interesting. I mean, right now, we're obviously in a book club for The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and I don't know, have you seen, like, a shift at all in doing morning pages, like, the exercises that it has you go through as far as your own creative journey so far, or
Honestly, I think my issue with creating things is how much I sometimes fixate on the audience and how they'll receive something, which is a byproduct of my career working in market research, where I sort of overanalyze and overthink, well, how would they react to this? And checking myself on that when I write, which I think is why I write at night because all of that shit goes away and I'm just writing what I want to do. And that's what people ultimately respond to when they can feel someone on the other side of what they're playing. So, morning pages have been an interesting exercise, but that's not really my problem ultimately of like getting things out. Uh, Ultimately, the only thing I need to really take care of in order to create is my own projections and ruminations of how everything's going to go wrong. And all I just really need to do is just connect to the feeling of what I'm trying to make and what I want someone to feel in a game. And that's what helps me move forward.
so I'm wondering, how has your background in psychology, shaped the way you design games and tell stories?
I feel like psychology is the one unifying factor when it comes to games because there's all these other things that you have to think about, like the technological components of engines and physics and the game aspects of mechanics and incentives. And then there's the art aspect where you're dealing with sound and music and visuals and communication and UI, all of those things. But psychology is ultimately like when you sit someone down in front of a game, it's what gets them to sort of push forward on a joystick? What gets them to keep playing the game? What gets them, in some cases, to keep coming back to the game and wanting to finish it and see what happens next? And all of that, I think, is just more a question of psychology. Like, I've played incredibly beautifully rendered games that were probably the most boring fucking experiences I've ever had. And it's because maybe they fixate on one particular aspect of the game, like graphical fidelity over everything, as opposed to how fun or compelling or interesting or spooky is this game. There's a reason why like there's so many great like indie horror games. Because sometimes you don't need a lot of that stuff. All you really need to do is understand who your player is and help them have an experience with your game as the medium between you and them.
Taking a step back in time, what's the biggest difference between undergrad John at Kalamazoo and grad school John at Carnegie Mellon?
Well, I think undergrad John thought he wanted to do like a PhD in psychology and was generally just like super unsure of himself Uh, Normally, I think a lot of people go to college and kind of get to see themselves in a way, or get to experience and try a bunch of different things. And I think when I was in college, I was dealing with like a lot of uh, family issues and identity issues of trying to figure out who I was. So undergrad wasn't really the most fun time. Grad school was great though. I met lifelong friends. I really enjoyed aspects of being at Carnegie Mellon, uh, and made some games and things that I still look back on fondly today and think. I think that's where I kind of initially found some of the blueprint for creating things that impact people. And it's like finding things that feel meaningful and meaningful to me in a way which, I don't know, creates empathy with an audience where they feel a sense of connection
Yeah,
and
I mean,
meaning to.
your style of video games is much more story driven, character driven. Um, there's definitely an emphasis on the writing side of it more than anything,
Yeah.
more than a lot of other games I've seen.
Yeah, and that's probably why I'm like a bad game designer, or like not a good game designer, not a bad game designer. I'm not a game designer's game designer. I wish I could make a game where it's just a lot of shapes sort of bouncing around the screen and it's purely mechanic and game feel and juiced up. But I kind of go back to always like my background in like theater and writing and characters and wanting to explore like people and psychology, and that's what shapes it.
How do you juggle your market research job with video game design? Because it sounds like there's parts of it where the psychology and of market research and what people are wanting like also kind of like bleeds into it sometimes.
It does, and I primarily have like a my research career because I really enjoy it, because I get to meet a lot of people that I wouldn't necessarily get to meet and explore a lot of interesting questions and topics and learn a lot about sometimes the topics I'm very interested in. Like my game right now is an inventory management game, and I did a research project about shopping. So I was sort of exploring an idea from two different angles, where one, it was like sort of this research of, well, why do people buy the things that they buy? How do they buy them? How do they assess and think about what is valuable? Especially like I think post COVID and in the current era of trying to figure out, well, how much should we consume? And then I have the game side of me where it's like I get to play and express those ideas and try to build a story around them. So everything ends up kind of influencing each other, and it's all material. It's all part of the experience ultimately, and
Yeah.
like sometimes the background research for it. But I think it's good. It's just always like a juggling act.
I mean, I relate to it because obviously I do multiple work things and multiple projects that kind of you wouldn't necessarily think fit together, but I try to almost look for the ways in which they do connect.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of interesting, like to see how, one thing can kind of actually blend into another.
I'm a firm believer in synchronicities. Like, even if you don't believe in all of like astrology or all of that stuff, I just am like a firm believer in synchronicity of sometimes things do just align, and you have to be listening and paying attention to it and knowing how to read the signals and the signs. And when you do, it can help. I think it helps like reaffirm my purpose and path, and recognize, like for vessels, I had a conversation with a friend of ours at a New Year's Eve party, he's a therapist, and we had a whole conversation about addiction, which I knew very little about. One of the characters in Vessels, she's a struggling alcoholic. She's sort of the wild card out of the characters that you can influence and ultimately try to sort of gain control over. And we had a really interesting conversation about this. And I didn't tell him any of this. And we started having a whole conversation around addiction and choice. And that he basically said, I don't think anyone would ever choose to do this. No one would ever choose to be an addict. You're robbed of your choice. And from my own perhaps naive understanding of like addiction and mental health and even the concept of free will and choice, and hearing that, I think it became this like really interesting clue. It's almost like signal to me to understand like, well, why can't I finish the third act when this game about choice? I can't get to it. And then I realized like, oh, like the thing that you share in common as the player and with this character is the removal of choice, and that she is trying to figure out, how do I escape this like feeling and this problem. And that's sort of like the key point of empathy between these two characters in the game, and what kind of like helps kind of remind you as the player, like, oh, I actually do get a choice in this, and I don't just have to do what this voice in my head tells me to do.
Yeah, for me, like the intersection of filmmaking and storytelling, I think one of the things I'm trying to do with this podcast, Curious Blend, is kind of merging that with, Createscape as a co-working business. And, because I just meet so many interesting people all the time. I know you talk to a lot of younger people who are just starting to get into video games and are interested in the video game industry. Is there one piece of advice that you would give them?
I don't know if I'm the right person to give people advice on how to get in the games industry, because I was never able to.
Well, you're independent too, so it's.
But I'm independent for like a reason.
Mhm.
Like I've never been able to get into the games industry, and I've tried. I've sent out resumes, I've done interviews. I was at one point willing to move to like Wisconsin to work at some educational game company. I was at one point going to move to New York. But I actually did try, and I've applied for jobs, and I've gotten really far along in the process. But for some curious twist of fate, like one company I tried to work at, the one state they wouldn't hire remotely from was Texas. And when it all just kept happening, to be completely honest, and it wasn't usually for things like, oh, you're not a good writer, like where they kind of ghost you, like your portfolio isn't up to snuff and they don't really have feedback, like they don't recognize it. But I kind of had to just recognize that there's a reason this isn't happening for me in this way. And it's because it's just not the path for me. And I've intentionally pursued a different path where I have a full time job working in research, which pays my bills, gives me some peace of mind. I still have free time. I get to do interesting things that help the other side of my life, and I can work on games at my own pace. And ultimately, I think you have to build the life that you want and make sure that you're financially stable. Like when I see people who sometimes like empty out their savings to make their 2D platformer with pixel art graphics and no necessarily new mechanics, I get a little worried. I'm going to be honest. Like, I'm not trying to stop anyone from pursuing their dream, and maybe you'll be the next Celeste, but working in games is just so competitive and so hard either to break into or have your game break through, that I've intentionally pursued a different path. That while I don't get to work on games as much as I would like to be as productive as I would like at it, I'm still in a place where, you know what, I can really make what I want to make and say what I want to say and not have my entire life and like financial security fall apart if it doesn't sell the way it needs to. I can pursue what I want to pursue. So that's why I guess my advice boils down to, sometimes you might need to figure out what role you want to play in the system. If you're okay just wanting to make like a AAA shooter and work on that and sort of fit within that existing system and build your portfolio to that, go do that, feel great. But for me, because I want to make like weird or like interesting games or very narrative focused games and not necessarily do what's orthodox for success, like I've built my life in order to support that goal.
What is your favorite video game of all time?
My favorite.
I think I already know the answer, but
well, what do you think the answer is?
I was gonna say Legend of Zelda, like the
Which
first one, Ocarina of Time.
No.
Okay, never mind.
You're close though. It's Majora's Mask.
Okay,
the one right after.
That was gonna be my second guess.
I mean, those are two. I'm definitely an N64 Zelda fan, but Majora's Mask is definitely my favorite game, and it's also like I have a theory that every game is in some way sometimes like a Zelda game. Where some of its ideas or things like come out maybe. And Vessels is definitely like a Majora's Mask game where you're kind of wearing people as a mask and you're pretending to be other people. So yeah, it's just so much fun. It's so dark. I love melancholy. And the sadder the Zelda is, the better the Zelda.
Well, if you could collaborate with any game developer out there or work on any particular series, what would that be? It's Pokemon, isn't it?
It is Pokemon. I would love to like make a Pokemon game or like work on Pokemon or do anything like with Nintendo.
I also wanted to talk for a minute about The Collaborators, which is a short film that we did very early on in our relationship, the second time, or in between the two times that we dated.
In between.
Like I'll let you fill in the gaps of this story, but basically we dated for 2 months about 10 years ago, and then
you broke up with me.
Then I broke up with you, and then you pitched me on The Collaborators. It was a script you wrote.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that?
Explain why I wrote that? I am a man with a plan, and I was like, I want to get my man back. If I was being completely honest with you, and I feel like we've talked about this, I wanted to get my man back and also just kind of like explore a relationship because we'd only known each other for 2 months but we'd had a lot of deep conversations and very like emotional. Like I know I opened up to you in those like first 2 months in ways I hadn't before. And I, for some reason, just thought like, let's just do something really meta. Like, let's make a film about a pair of filmmakers making a film about their breakup. And
then you pitched me on making this film.
And then I pitched you on making this film.
And then we made it.
And then we made it. And everything that happened in the script kind of happened in real life. I'm not going to lie. Like I almost walked off set when we were filming it because I was so frustrated because I feel like we're having all these communication issues.
But it kind of happened during the production of the movie. I mean, that's what's funny is that it was almost like reading the future in a way as well as reading the past. Like it was, I don't know, there was a lot of layers to this. But yeah, I mean, working on that short film together also like we bonded a lot, grew even closer, and then we started dating again a few months later because I don't know, the friendship just blossomed in that way into something more romantic. And yeah, it's just, I really think we wouldn't be here today or have gotten back together if it wasn't for The Collaborators.
I definitely think we wouldn't be together if we hadn't done that film. And I don't know, I guess obviously I made a game where you possess people and pretend to wear other people, and how much sometimes you kind of like pretend to be yourself as your idea of you, or you try to be like who I thought you wanted. Just like I think you were kind of pretending to be who you thought I wanted. So it was nice to kind of puncture that bubble and really get to know each other and see like more sides of ourselves, which I think are far more compelling. You totally glossed over, by the way, the part where you rewrote the script. And I was so angry. This happened all like off screen. You didn't see any of it, but I was so angry, and I was like talking to my best friend Steven about it. And we were just revving each other up about like, how could he do this? He has no respect for me. Like he never liked me. He never loved me. He doesn't respect me as like a coworker even, or a collaborator, because he did this. But I think it was interesting because like if I go back to it now, it's like sort of like a little bit more of your perspective coming through where from what I wrote. And like I think maybe trying to soften perhaps like my character in it and also offer more context for, say, your character in it.
Yeah, I mean, even the creation of The Collaborators was very, like, it was a messy collaborative process. And, like, we both learned a lot about each other and kind of saw, like, a lot more authenticity kind of come through that and learned a lot. And, it was, at the end, I think, like, even if the film is just, okay or what it is,
I mean, it's so pretentious, like, on some level. And that, I mean, like,
someone added it on Letterboxd, which I think is really funny.
Are you joking?
No, it's the only short film I've done that's like it's somehow on Letterboxd, and I saw that I was like, I kind of want to review it on Letterboxd now.
You can't do that. You're gaming the numbers. I think it's like it obviously didn't get a TIFF or Cannes or any of that shit, but it served its purpose. I think.
Well, we got back together.
We got back together. Success, but also like. I don't know. Not everything you make is going to be like needs to play at that level.
Sure.
Like sometimes you just need to make things with the people you work with in order to like better understand them so you can like so your relationship can progress and you can move on to like different things and new things and better
Yeah.
things.
It was definitely like such a important stepping stone in our relationship, but also just like my own creative journey. And it's just, it's kind of amazing that it's like almost been 10 years. I think it's been 9 years at this point since we made that. And, um, anyways, I'm like equally proud about the story of the whole making of that movie as I am like, the film itself. So, do you have any funny or unexpected moments from your career that you feel like sharing?
I loved testing pilots in market research. So I'd get to see a lot of like shows that never made it to air and some with like actual like celebrities and stuff and got to see like different ideas that they were like brewing up and doing. And when I was like really young into my career, I actually saw a pilot for Kelly Catrone, who I'm obsessed with and love. You never watched The Hills. You're
I
not a
did not.
girly girl.
I'm sorry.
But I love Kelly Catrone, and I used to love that sort of like I'm a boss and I'm a huge bitch, but I'm so smart and good at what I do, like the Miranda Priestley, Kelly Catrone model. And I saw this pilot that she did and where she was kind of like advising and giving counsel to like young creatives and trying to help them get into the industry. And it never made it to air. And there's a conversation where Kelly is like sitting at a kitchen table with this girl that she's been mentoring and her mom. And they have this whole conversation about the desire to create in a family getting passed down and how concerned the girl's mom was for her that she would fail, that she wouldn't succeed, that she'd waste all her money or tumble down this hill. And I still remember that because I was very young and trying to figure out like I have all this creative energy. Both of my parents have all this creative energy. All my extended family do too, and none of them have ever pursued it. And I still remember because there's like great advice in that. It was like where Kelly was sort of saying, this energy has just been trying to be expressed through your family, and that time has come. And I remember seeing that and thinking, like, you know what? You're right. Like, there's a reason these like cycles keep repeating, these desires keep happening again, and someone has to act upon it. So that happened like very young in my career. I think I was like only like 21 or something or 22. And it was a great moment. That's probably like my favorite, like unseen bit from my career. I wish I could talk about all the pilots and stuff that I've seen, and stuff that made it to air and probably should have. That was a great show.
Do you think like being creative in general takes a lot of courage?
Yes. When I first went to college, and I sat with my advisor, he worked in the music department and he like taught voice lessons. And I sat down and I showed him like, here's my schedule, here's my year plan, because I was just that kind of obsessed. Like I knew I wanted to be a psychology major. I knew all the classes I wanted to do. It was so much fun for me. And he was like, okay, great. You know what you want to do? Let's do a voice lesson. And we had a voice lesson where he started teaching me like how to sing. When he was giving me the voice lesson, he told me afterwards, like, you're fearless. Like you're going for these notes and you're trying it and you're just doing it. And to be honest, like it's the first time I'd ever heard something like that being used to describe me. And it really helped me, especially at that time, to sort of just go after what I wanted, take the class, go for the thing, say what you think you need to say during class or in an essay. And it really helped me. And then I think later in life, I've kind of had to revisit that idea of being fearless, especially as it feels like the stakes increase. The older you get, like, do I have kids? Am I making enough? Should I stay at this job? Where I realize that being fearless and being courageous aren't the same thing. And that sounds so maybe like mincing words, but like I think of being like fearless is like you live without fear or sometimes without the knowledge of fear because you don't know how bad things could go. You don't know how bad you might sound. Like when I tried to sing Shallow that one time. But I think I've
This was at karaoke.
karaoke in South Padre. I think I was fearless at that time because I didn't know what to be afraid of. Because I was just so willing to do whatever I wanted and not thinking really about the future. Where now I think that I'm older, I think it's more important to be courageous, where you are aware of what the fears you might have are, but you still need to press on. This is such a Legend of Zelda thing because Link has the Triforce of Courage. Such a dork. But that's why I think it's like it's such an important skill to have and one that you can grow and learn and recognize that there's moments to be courageous in tiny ways, courageous in big ways, and to understand what your fears are and still n- act in face of them.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit more difficult the older you get because you're
Yeah.
kind of like carrying around your own baggage of life and your own disappointments or life traumas or struggles, and so it's I don't know. I like to really approach it as like being creative is like you have to tap into that energy of like thinking like a kid where you are just kind of take the leap and you're not like overanalyzing all the what if scenarios and
I think there's something that you did when you were working on a short film script and you had been iterating on the first script for maybe a couple months. And then you asked me to help out on it. And then I came in and like we collaborated on the second version of the script and it worked. It was fine. And then I remember you went on a trip. I think you called me from the beach in like Mexico. Where you're like, you know what, last night I had this entirely other vision for the script. And then we were just talking on the phone and you just talked out the entire script to me. And I was like, this is good. This is great. Like, and you did that like all on your own. And all of that stuff was in the past. And I think we had like a part of that conversation where you're just kind of like almost wrestling with that idea. Like, well, what about all that work that happened before? But I think that moment was so much more important because it was like, you know what, sometimes you need to be like courageous and break from what you've established in the past. You know what, I don't actually need this. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And all of that stuff served to bring you to that point where you took the leap. And you know what, we've done table reads with people. We've showed this to a bunch of friends. We've heard all of their thoughts on it. We've started scouting locations and thinking about this. But this is actually what the script needs to be. And I always admire that kind of like creative, like courageousness of recognizing when something isn't working and still willing to like take the risk of like, no, I think we actually need to do it this way.
I also want to see like what's next for your video game company, Lucky Sun, and are there any like kind of upcoming projects that you want to share or talk about real quick?
So currently working on my next game, which is a narrative romance with inventory management, where you play a donkey and you are trying to reunite two lost lovers. You might be trying to reunite them. You might be also trying to find them someone else. Depends on how you feel. But romance is everyone has their own ideas when it comes to romance. But we've been watching Love Island a lot. So we
It's moved beyond just a guilty pleasure to I can't stop talking about it.
full scale obsession.
I mean, that sounds so exciting. I mean, I can't wait to see whatever your next project is and play that game. Just, you can find Vessels on Steam. So I hope everyone, who's listening to this checks it out because it's a really awesome game. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me. I had so much fun talking to you in this format. I mean, it's, especially just dissecting the creative process and like the things that we are drawn to work on. So I really appreciate you doing this with me.
All right. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed being part of this curious blend.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us on Curious Blend. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and found it as inspiring and thought provoking as I did. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. Stay curious, and until next time, this is Keller Davis signing off.